Good morning. The Committee of the Whole is returned from recess. Being that we don't even have a quorum, we'll recess back until adequate number of my colleagues have showed up. Thank you. The call of the order, the correction, the committee of the whole is returned from recess. We do have a quorum at this time. One of the issues that have been brought up to my office and the Office of Finance and Budget is that there's been a surplus pay down that I know that it's in the minds of all my colleagues and the people of Guam. And we're going to ask the question of Lester to please explain how that was paid down and what was paid down. And that I did get from my colleagues a request for an official report, not just the letter, but an official report of how and where the money came from. All right? So, reminders, number one. Okay, Lester's on, okay. Reminder, my colleagues, please maintain the 6 feet or as much as possible. These folks, I guess, they're okay. But for everyone else, maintain 6 feet, maintain the mask, covering all up to your nose. Keep your hands sanitized. We will maintain in the session hall no more than 25 individuals. The sergeant arm will make sure that if someone needs to come in, somebody needs to go out. That's how we're going to be exchanging it. All right? We're at a good number right now, and we'll move from there. Being Lester, are you on the line? Brian?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Lester, if you can please explain the letter that we received or that was published referring to the deficit being paid down, and can you explain it more, or and then hopefully soon we'll get an official report exactly how the deficit was paid down and from what source?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Byrne is actually the person who should speak to that. Mr. Byrne conducts and orchestrates the activities and reporting necessary for the auditors to actually undertake and produce the audit. This press release has the numbers, but I don't believe, I saw this the same time you guys did, that the audit in itself was actually released. So the questions are more DOA and Mr. Burns specifically. I'm not the person that can actually sit through and discuss what it is that you're asking me to do, because as everybody will recall, it's a function of DOA. DOA is actually appropriated the money for the single audit every year. Mr. Byrne interacts with the auditors and makes sure that all the agencies report anything that is required for the accomplishment of the audit. But this number here and the release of the press release, I got it at the same time you did. But more to your point, sir, about how the monies were allocated, what was it that was paid down as far as the deficit items? That's a response for Mr. Byrne, not me.
All right, thank you, sir. Then we'll wait for Mr. Byrne to show up, because I know that he's en route. And we do have presence to the people of Guam. We have the Office of Finance and Budget here. We also have Ms. Shimizu from Department of Revenue and Taxation. We will now go back to Senator Torres. You still have some questions? Because Senator Tello, you're right after Senator Torres. You still have some questions? No. You had some questions, ma'am? If you can please ask your questions of Mr. Carlson. And then Senator Tello, you be next after.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Lester. I'm very interested still in the corporate tax projections. Specifically, when you look at the end of July, it's 21 million more than projected, with 2 months to go. And I'm wondering, is there anything that may have contributed to this large positive variance, such as, some anomalies? Because as I understand corporate taxes, those funds are based on prior year tax results and how corporations did in the prior tax year. So if corporations did well this year, if they did well last year, I mean, it makes sense that this fiscal year collections would lead to good results. And my worry is that this tax year, the economy is obviously not doing well as it was last year because of the COVID-19 circumstances. Therefore, how can we be certain that an 85 million projection is achievable? If the economy isn't doing well this tax year, therefore, you would think that it would lead to a decreased corporate tax collection next fiscal year. So, can you touch again on the health of the corporate tax collections and why you believe it's sustainable going forward into the next fiscal year?
Thank you, Senator Torres. The comparative that was sent to the body yesterday marked comparative S-bill versus BBMR. You can go across and look at the corporate tax category. OFB and BBMR were pretty consistent in our application of where we thought up until recently corporate income tax would be, and that was in the $84 million range, and then it ultimately ended up OFB and BBMR. We were kind of in agreement at $85.4 million, but when we looked at the receipts at the request of the body so we could put together a mock-up of a CRER, we had already exceeded that amount, and as I mentioned yesterday, to date we have collected another $1.1 million on top of the 89.9 we already reported to you. So we're at $91 million in corporate tax receipts. Corporate tax, there is a surge in the filing deadline, yes, but corporate tax is also remitted throughout the course of the fiscal year. And in our sheet that we sent you guys, that basically shows how we thought that the $85 million would be allocated, in the approved 2020 budgets. You'll note that October, 2.8 million, November, 1.2, December, 10, January, 4.5, February, 2, March, 3, and in April, we were expecting $24 million. And we got, a substantial amount over the $24 million in July. So our July was effectively our April. And then moving forward, we still anticipated after April collections under the heading of corporate, $5 million for May, $9.8 million for June, and then July was 3.6, and August and September, the months that are yet to be fully accounted for. Those 2 months there are $16 million. So it's conceivable that we might hit $100 million in corporate income tax revenue. And this is all post-Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, when corporate tax revenues used to be about $140 million. So there are a number of factors leading to the health of corporations and their filing of taxes. And maybe since you have Mrs. Shimizu there, maybe you might want to ask her about that. But I'm giving you the numbers that we put in to align our reporting to the body is broken out in a manner such that, if there's a variation from that number in a particular category, it'll bring that discrepancy to our attention.
So
Um,
why do you have a
we're-
spike then
we're-
in September, Lester? Why is September such a huge spike at 13.7 million?
The spike in September of $13 million, it's probably because people are looking at when their fiscal year ends and being sure that they remitted everything that they were supposed to remit. But it's based upon historical weighted averages on corporate tax remissions. So the way we allocated this year's authorized amount of $85,000 isn't just because we left $13 million on the table. It's based upon statistical weights assigned to different tax categories based upon historical remittances.
Okay, we'll move on, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lester. Appreciate the answers.
You're welcome.
Thank you. My colleagues, I think we also have Ms. Mendiola from GITA, and I know that a few, Senator Tello and Senator Jim had requested, and Senator Will. I'd like to recognize that we have Mr. Byrne, Ed, and maybe we asked the question earlier of Lester, and he said that he deferred the answers to you. The recent letter posted by the governor's office that the deficit was paid down. Can you please explain the deficit that was paid down and what was paid down from 84 million to now we're at 47? If you can please break that down and explain that all, because my colleagues have also asked for an official report of that. And if we can get that soon, other than your reporting, you're gonna tell us exactly what we needed to know. All right, sir?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, the audited financial statements are not yet available for an unrelated reason relating to a component unit. However, the missing information doesn't affect the governmental funds, so we thought it important that we made clear what happened to the government funds. At the end of fiscal 2018, the deficit on the general fund was 83.4 million. During the course of fiscal 2019, there were two factors that reduced that deficit. The revenues changed and expenditures changed. The excess of revenues over its expenditures was 28.2 million, and the net transfers, which were transfers in, were 28.2 million. So that results in a net change in the fund of a positive 35.6 million. Now, on a balance sheet basis, that can be demonstrated, and you'll see the numbers in the audited statements, an increase in net assets of 30.1 million and a decrease in liabilities of 5.5 million. The increase in net assets are of two types. One is a slight increase in cash of 13 million, but the big increase was in receivables from outside of 11.5 million and from other funds of 14.5 million. Payables decreased by 5.4 million. So paying down is really not a good way of demonstrating what happened. We reduced the deficit, and until we eliminate the deficit, it will always result in a change in net assets and net liabilities in different proportions. What does all that mean? And the official report, of course, will be the audited statements that will show these numbers. What does that mean? Well, we have a lot of receivables. If you add those two figures I gave you together, it's like 26 million. That is a big contributor to the cash that we received in fiscal 20. A receivable at the end of 19 will result in cash in 20. I'm happy to answer any further questions on that, but that's a fairly detailed explanation of what happened.
Thank you, sir. And if you can generate an official report, we would appreciate that, if we can get one. The whole write-up of what you've explained.
Yes, well, of course, the official report is the audited statements. I have an extract here that I think summarizes it a little clearer, and I'd be happy to give you that.
All right, and if we can get a copy of that one, then we appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Now, moving along, Senator Tello, you have the floor. Any of your questions, ma'am? To Lester, Ms. Mendiola, or the panel?
Sujus Masi, Mr. Chair, and good morning. Before I move on, though, with discussions on the budget bill, I'd like to take a moment to offer my thoughts and prayers for our Magahaga and her family, and all those who've been affected by the coronavirus. And I join the people of Guam in praying for a speedy recovery for everyone. Mr. Chair, thank you again for the opportunity. My question would go, aside from available draft financial reports for the general fund revenues for the month of July 2020, is there a draft financial report available for special funds? I guess this question goes to Lester. They were able to do the CRER for the taxes, but as you know, one of the greatest issues that we have in this crisis is the drop in revenues for our special funds. Was there a report generated for special funds?
I got that request early this morning. It's on its way right now. Mind you, it's in draft. Mind you that if a certain agency had a prior reported amount and subsequent billings, let's say for solid waste, came in for the month of July, but they were in payments or invoices for the month of March for services, then those revenues are then reconciled to the March numbers. So give me about a minute and I'll send it right over to you.
Thank you. Considering the collections thus far with the general fund and special funds, does BBMR expect a surplus at the end of the fiscal year? This is to Lester.
No, I don't. As I mentioned yesterday, the fact that we have customs that is in severe need of assistance, not to any fault of their own, and the fire department, if you will all recall that last year, when we looked at the obligations for the government of Guam and what we had to do as far as the utilization of the governor's transfer authority, on top of about $5 million for retiree medical dental life premiums, the governor used her transfer authority to also transfer about $500,000 to the fire department because despite their best efforts to curb their operational expenses, which is the bulk of what it is that constitutes their budget, they had about a $500,000+ shortfall. So there are agencies like the fire department that will have a deficit this fiscal year. We're already in communication with them on mitigation, and we have been for a while on mitigating that projected shortfall. So when you take into account what we're not able to collect for the operational requirements of customs, coupled with the fact that, as Mr. Byrne mentioned yesterday, we had to use general fund money to subsidize the hotel occupancy tax bond payment that came from the general fund. The the amount that the general fund is anticipated to collect in excess of adopted revenues needs to be used to meet fiscal 20 government obligations in those areas that I just discussed, and maybe Mr. Byrne can elaborate on a few more of these areas that I didn't touch on, but I don't think that it's quote unquote
Thank you.
indicative of overall that we had a surplus and we took care of all our obligations government wide, and that's available. But like I said, maybe Mr. Byrne has a little bit more color on that.
Okay, thank you, Lester. So Lester, you mentioned earlier that you said there was not going to be a surplus, that you anticipate a shortfall at the end of this fiscal year. Did you mention a number when you made that prediction?
I don't think I ever said that. I said I think I'm very optimistic about where we're going to end up in 20. I don't believe I ever said that we were going to have a surplus, and certainly not at this level. As I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation today, the number that was released was news to me as well. So am I okay with the fact that we'll collect general fund revenues in excess of adopted levels? Yes, simply because I understand that we're probably going to have to make a supplemental payment to retiree medical, dental, life premiums. And I believe that the shortfall in the fire department of $500,000 last year is going to grow maybe to $1 million or more. So, I mean, it sounds good, but as we discussed yesterday, there are other obligations of the government of Guam for fiscal 20 that need to be addressed. Vendors, personnel, the whole list, utilities. Like I said, maybe Mr. Byrne has a little bit more color on that.
Thank you, Lester. Lester, the report that was given to us for the reserves that was dated June 30th, 2020 in reserves, there's a $31 million held in reserve totaling. And for the record, what is the latest information available regarding the appropriation reserves? And is that held in reserve actually cash?
There isn't an update to that. That is a statutorily required report.
Right.
It's not cash. Basically, my job is to control the ability for people to access appropriated funds and allow for Mr. Byrne then to process either a purchase order or any number of items. We keep a 15% reserve, the general fund reserve, on all of our agencies. I have been releasing the reserves because we're getting close to the end of the fiscal year, and there are extremely justifiable and sound rationale behind the agency heads asking for reserves to be released, for the continued operation of their agency. So the reserve is there as a tool to ensure, as Mr. Byrne explained earlier, about expenditure control. And my job is to ensure that agencies are not given 100% spending authority when we may have a revenue hitch somewhere down the line, and we may have to mitigate things. I have returned several requests for agencies funded under the Tourist Attraction Fund, even though they have a budget, right? So, but my budget, just by looking at my budget, I should be okay. Well, that's what you would think, but since the TAF is the prime example, along with customs, of the adversely affected agencies as far as revenue from COVID is concerned, I have returned several requests for filling of positions that were authorized in 20, simply because we don't know what the allocation of revenues for these specific agencies will materialize to in 21. So why hire them today and then let them go on October 1st?
Okay,
Wait
thank
till
you.
October
Mr. Byrne,
1st.
would you like to comment? Oh, I'm sorry, Lester. I thought you were done. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Lester. I thought you were done.
No, I mean, so the reserves, the report is indicative of what was held in reserve at that point in time. And we are, for reasons that are appropriate and are critical to operational requirements, releasing the reserves. It's a budgetary tool, but it's certainly not cash. Especially if you looked at the TAF, the debt service. We mentioned this yesterday. The monthly allocation of TAF revenues for the month of July was insufficient to pay debt service, so the general fund had to step in and contribute. Well, that's going to happen for the remaining months of the fiscal year, unless collections rise such that the waterfall of funds is that you take the monthly set aside for principal and interest on the bonds first. That's our agreement with bondholders. And then after that, the money's going to then be apportioned to the entities that were given appropriations in fiscal year 20.
Okay. Thank you, Lester. Mr. Byrne, the 31 million that's in reserve right now, or has been set aside, as Lester, explained the scenario. This is August already. Do you have an updated version of the reserve report for the month of July?
Senator, that report was prepared by BBMR.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Byrne. And the other question I have is that I guess it was projected with GVB adjusting the 2021 arrivals, a projection of 250, and now it's been increased to 400,000. Was that estimate given through just through GVB, or was it a guesstimate, or why was the increase to 400,000 from 250? Was that something that you agreed with with OFB, Lester? And with OFB and BBMR, did they agree on those numbers at 400,000?
We agreed at a revenue level, and maybe Mr. Guerrero can speak more on that, because we talked about our collective hesitation on even cutting a $44 million fund source in half, because cutting it in half wasn't indicative of a number we could support.
Okay.
Cutting it in half would have been 20.
The numbers were the same. Thank you, Lester. I just looked at it. The numbers were the same both on your report as well as OFB, so there was no variable between the two.
Senator, that number took a lot of discussion to arrive at. So it's not willy-nilly. And I'd like Mr. Guerrero to maybe explain how he felt comfortable with that number too, because we both came down from numbers where we were at simply because of what's going on.
Yeah, I don't think there was a discrepancy now after looking at the numbers here. I do like to thank OFB for all the work that they put into this and being very conservative at this point. We're looking at revenues right now, this year, 2020, and what's coming in. And of course, it's been saddled by the federal government's funding that's been pouring into Guam, the PUA, all those variables. But we're not going to see that in FY2021. We're not going to have that cushion in place. So when things are looking, as you say, a little bit more than rosy, but actual, it's not going to be the same in 2021. Especially when we haven't, by the way, did you guys receive the audit yet for FY19?
Senator, if I could answer that.
Okay, thank you.
As I just mentioned earlier in my comments, it's been held up because of the late submission of a component unit. We're going to try and make sure it gets out within the next few days. The component unit finally reported in over the weekend.
Okay, so then this whole paying down the deficit had nothing to do with FY19 excess revenue? Yeah, I know. It does. How do they know they have that much money to pay
That's the
down?
burden of what I was talking about.
Yeah, but that's why I'm wondering, how are you able to spend money when you haven't even done an audit yet? Or the audit hasn't even come out yet?
Well, I decided that it was important during the budget discussions that we make clear exactly what happened. The component unit that I spoke about doesn't affect the governmental funds, it only affects the government-wide funds. So these numbers, although not audited, will not change.
But you spent it with something. It came from somewhere, right? The funding. So that was my question. How are you able to spend money from an FY? I'm not going to move into that because I know that that's probably another discussion all by itself. And I'm looking forward to your summary to do the forensic on that. And how were you able to pay down the deficit with funding that hasn't even had an audit completed yet? So thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair. I
Thank
reserve my questions for additional questions for later.
Okay, thank you. My colleagues, just please be advised that it's on the extract of the deficit pay down is on your it's on your shared file. So please feel free to go in there and you can take a look at it. All right, Senator Muna, the reminder I advised earlier is 3 questions. We still need to get to the budget document. I know you have. I know all our colleagues have questions. But try to minimize it because we need to get to the big packet. The panel is not going anywhere. They're going to be here throughout the whole budget session, be able to answer all the questions and discuss what we need. Senator Muñoz, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to all of the panel members that are here, including OFB and Mr. Carlson, Mr. Byrne, and Ms. Shimizu. Thank you very much for being available for us for all of these questions. And just like the minority leader, I want to offer our prayers to all of those whose health is affected by COVID, and we wish you very well. My question, a lot of my questions have been answered in regards to the revenue, and I'm looking forward to going into the budget bill. But I do just have one very simple question, and maybe, I don't know if OFB or even Ms. Shimizu can just kind of give me a little explanation. So last year, the license fees and permits were estimated at about $6.971 million. And right now, the OFB projection at this year is $4.905 million. And it's that caused like a $2 million drop. And I just, maybe somebody can just give me, and maybe even the listening public, a little explanation of that $2 million drop between 6.9 and 4.9 million under license fees and permits.
Maybe we'll have Steve answer first, Daphne, and then you can respond. Steve?
Yes, Senator. You know, when we looked at the tracking of what we were looking for under the license fees, it appears that, you know, we're not tracking above and we're slightly tracking below. So when we projected forward to be on the conservative side, knowing the unknowns that will happen, we dropped it down by $1 million. That's what we did.
And so that was just like you said, a conservative number?
Yes.
To bring it down to 2 million?
Yes.
Okay. I'm also noticing too, like on the CRER, the one that we just received yesterday, that there is a unfavorable $2 million drop there again, from 6.125 to actual revenues at 3.961. So I'm wondering too if that's another example of the projections that you put at $2 million.
Normally, as a rule of thumb, when we do the projection, we normally take what the tracking is and then maybe add in or adjust it according to other factors that we know may or may not happen, and we take those numbers and project it forward. In this case, in license and fees, it actually went down by 2 million simply because the tracking right now is at 4.2. So if you take that into consideration and move forward, it would be difficult to say that we can maintain a $6 million level when the tracking today is showing a $2 million variance. And we apply that same concept to all the other categories for revenue.
Okay, I look forward to hearing also Ms. Shimizu's comments on that as well.
Thank you, Senator Munia. Regarding licenses, fees, and permits, and I couldn't tell you the exact composition of this particular line, but I can say that if we're referring to, of course, there was a time period during this public health emergency that we were shut down from March 16 until we reopened at Revenue Tax on May 18. That was a Monday. And so during that time, while we were shut down, of course, we were not issuing any business licenses or any other type of licenses outside of our agency. When we did open up, actually the Business License Permit Center was open on May 11 at the DPW compound. At that time, of course, we saw a huge influx of people come in to pay for their business licenses. The other area, which perhaps maybe this particular item may be composed of, which could be driver's licenses as well, which we also did not issue during that time, but which we're right now trying to get caught up on. So, I believe that, and again, I'm not exactly sure of the exact composition of this, but if referring to licenses and permits as Revenue Tax issues them, during the time period that we were closed, we, were not able to get those issued. So perhaps that could be, I guess this is the result of that. But, at this point, we are working to get caught up with the licenses, business licenses, driver's licenses, and all the other different types of services that we are providing. We're trying to get caught up with those.
So is it fair to say that $2 million drop is conservative?
I'm not sure that that's something I can weigh in on. Again, I can only just talk or speak on, our area. And again, in terms of the whole composition of this particular line item, perhaps if we could pull apart that piece, then again, I can only weigh in on our area. I can't weigh in on the full composition of this particular item.
Okay. Thank you again for that explanation. And thank you again, Mr. Chair. Basically, that was just my simple question. A lot of my questions were already answered, but looking forward to breaking down the budget bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Munoz. Senator Pito Tzerlay, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to direct my question, and I'm just going to get right to the point because, some of these collections and anticipation of money coming in, I just want to ask, we're facing something like an 83 million deficit. Am I correct on that one? About 83 million?
No, Senator, that was the deficit at the end of fiscal 18.
So what is the anticipation on the next deficit that we want to come out with?
Well, as I mentioned, there was a reduction of that deficit to whatever, I think you've got my piece of paper, 47.8 at the end of
47 million.
0.8 at the fiscal 19.
Okay, so I was just talking to the chairman, and we mentioned like 775 million that we anticipate to be comfortable with. Am I right on that one?
I'm sorry, sir. Could you just repeat that?
775 million. That is what was mentioned in as far as the anticipation of the collection. So with all those collections that are coming in, are we comfortable to say that 775 million is going to become a reality?
That's a matter for OFB to respond.
Yes, Senator. Considering all the factors going forward, the tracking of most of the revenue categories, and all the information we know today of how it would affect the operations of government, especially in the collection part, in 2021. That is our best assessment at this point.
So our estimate would be probably no less than 775 million if we follow the trend of collection.
We hope so. We
Okay.
hope at least we meet up to the 775, yes.
Okay, Steve, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Senator Amanda, do you have any questions, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. Mrs. Shimizu, Mr. Byrne, Hafide, Lester, and thank you to OFB. Mr. Guerrero, I know that a lot of us, when we saw the new budget bill, we were very concerned to see all of the different cuts across the board for every single agency. And I was wondering if you can share with us, the body here, and for everyone listening at home, how we came up with those numbers. As you shared in your opening statement, you used a variety of different methods, formulas to come up with your projected revenues. But how did you come, in fairness, to make these cuts to the different agencies? Can you explain that?
Certainly. When we first started this whole budget process, we needed to figure out what a good starting point would be. If you take a look at the history of the appropriations for the Budget Acts for the last 5-6 years, going all the way back, I believe, to 2017, the 2019 appropriation level was the lowest of all 5 years. So we thought it was a good starting point, considering that the level itself was already a $23 million reduction over the current year appropriation. Then from there, we applied certain projection methods to determine how we could best address each particular category within the revenues, within the revenue listing, because each category basically is different. You have different effects that, different concerns, different what we call that, even to the point of anomalies that would affect the collection of each one of these categories, and we applied it going forward. Some of them we used, historical data, which we thought was appropriate. Some we just used current collection rates, and in most parts, it was very difficult for us to even project forward simply because of all the unknowns. So we took the data we knew today and moved it and applied it forward. And that's how we did on most of the categories.
But Mr. Guerrero, for the individual agencies, I'm asking how you came to the number that we saw a decrease for each agency. How did you come to those numbers, not the projections?
Absolutely. Going down to as far as the allocation of the appropriation, we took the 2020 appropriation level for the departments, took the percentage of those allocations, of those appropriations against the bottom line, and used that and applied it to the 775 that we're proposing in the bill for distribution. Bear in mind that when we did that, that was the initial concept. But when we did that, we found out there was agencies that required a little bit more, simply because of their operational costs in terms of filling all warm bodies, contractual obligations, utilities, office rent. So some departments actually got a little bit more and some got a little bit less because we have to do the offset. So not when we looked across the board, it seemed like all departments got anywhere from a 3% to a 4.9% cut. But it was equitable as far as the distribution, simply based on the requirements and needs of each agency. That's how we did the allocation.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Of course, I know every senator here with the oversight of the different agencies, we all want to make sure that our particular agency was not cut unfairly and that the priorities of the government are all met equitably, as you said. So I appreciate that explanation from OFB. I'm sure you guys have been crunching all the numbers over and over again to ensure that we meet the mandates of every individual agency. So thank you very much. Mrs. Shimizu, I do have a question for you regarding our tax refund payments. I think it was right before the July 15th filing deadline that we received a report from Refund Tax about how many, our total amount of filers. So do you have the dollar amount for the returns for 2020?
Excuse me, so Senator Shelton, just to clarify, are you referring to the refund liability report, which we filed with the,
Yeah, I think it was on July 14th. You filed it with the legislature.
if I could just pull that information. I'm sorry, I don't have it readily available right now with me. I'm sorry, thank you.
The letter?
Thank you, Senator
Thank you,
Therese.
Senator Tlahi. So I could walk you through this report if you like. So this report, of course, is required by law for the Department of Revenue and Taxation to provide to our legislature, our legislative body on a monthly basis. And if you look at the very top section, that is the section on total tax returns filed by tax year, starting with tax year 2006 and going through 2019. If you look at I guess, with regards to probably the most current activity, which is what's probably most relevant at this time, you can look at the total tax returns filed at the top. For 2019, we have 41,079 total individual 1040 income tax returns filed. So those may consist of married filing joint, single filers. So we can't tell how many actual individuals those taxpayers make up, but that is tax filings, right? And then if you look below that, it will show the total tax returns filed where there was a liability or where there was no refund due because it was a zero return, and that's 2,688. Of the total tax returns, total refund returns was 38,391. The refund returns processed and paid was 4,415, and that's for 2019 returns. Keep in mind that we were still paying out 2018 refunds in this year, so that's 4,415. The refund returns processed awaiting payment as of this report is 30,914 for 2019 only. But if you look to the right of that number, there's 34,279 total returns for all tax years sitting. At the second section below it, you'll see the total refund returns processed and paid, and that's row G. So far for 2019, there's been 17.91 million that has been paid out. That's all been paid out in this year. Refund returns processed awaiting payment as of this report was 82.59 million. Total of, for all tax years is a little bit over 90 million. And the total refunds and interest paid and owed is showing at 100.5 million, and that's inclusive of those that have already been paid.
So that 90 million, that represents 2000, tax years 2006 to the present. That total liability for those years, is there a reason that that carryover number is still so high?
Do you mean from the prior years?
Yes.
You know, I know, well, with regards to refunds, there is a statute of limitations to file a return so that you can receive a refund. But it is possible that there are, at times, there is a need for, if there is a situation with a taxpayer or tax filing, there may be a need to extend the statute. And we do see situations where, you know, that taxpayers will consent to extending the statute. It could be because the return is in audit. In terms of the prior years, of course, we'll have to look at that. You know, I know that the numbers that we see that really move are the current years, but again, there is a statute of limitations to file a refund return or to file so that you can receive your refund, but at times those statutes can be extended, and again, with the consent of the taxpayer. Okay,
I understand. Thank you very much for that information. And I know that this was filed right before the filing deadline on July 15th, so these numbers are you know, dated already, but is there anything that you can share with us about any new filers? Do we have any idea about what the total filing number for 2019 is? Because what we're looking at here for 2019 compared to 2018 is 24,000 less filers, but I mean, in that day between when this was filed and the deadline, do you know how many more came in?
And thank you for that question also, Senator Therese Tlahi. It's that question as well. Our team's actually working on it. I followed up with them yesterday.
Okay.
They're working to get that report. That report is due by the 15th of every month. We're working to get it. We'll try to get it to our the legislative body as soon as possible, so you'll have the most updated information. I'll work to try to get that to you within the next few days at the latest.
Thank you. And the reason why, of course, I asked that is because of the total refunds and interest paid. I mean, historically, the budget has provided for $125 million. And as you can see, over the last few years, that has been actually more. And I want to ensure that we are providing for that properly. So I thank you very much, Mrs. Shimizu. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time.
Thank you. Senator Paris. My colleagues, a reminder, okay, we still have Mr. Carlson and Ms. Mendiolas on the line. So if you have any questions for those, please
All right, thank you,
feel
Mr.
free. Thank you.
Mr. Chair. So this question's for OFB in regards to their revenue forecasting. How can you speak to the robustness and the adaptiveness of your revenue forecasting? I mean, considering that GVB provided their presentation that there was roughly a 98% drop in tourist arrivals to Guam, and also in their presentation, roughly about 10% of tourist dollars comes into the government coffers. So, I mean, it seems to me it's a mixed bag, right? We're insulated by the money is coming in through the federal government. So perhaps towards the end of this year we'll be fine, but I'm thinking in the following year when, it's uncertain as to whether the amount that we will receive in federal dollars and, should a tourist industry not pick up, how robust and how adaptive is the revenue forecasting? Is there some indicator that you can use to kind of guide us to ensure that the money that we're appropriating is accurate and reliable?
Yes, Senator. In regards to any type of federal assistance to help Guam in the future, that is very difficult right now to predict. What we can do is utilize the information we have based on the amount that we have received from the federal government, and use that to see how far those monies will take us into fiscal year 2021. If they continue doing the extension on some of these federal assistance money, that will definitely help and change the basically financial landscape, even the tourism here on Guam. To answer your question truthfully, I can't really think of how it would help if I don't know exactly how much money we're going to receive. The only thing we know now is to calculate based on the number of tourists and the effects it may have, and the amount that we're estimating around the 18 million based on the 400,000 is probably, I guess, best guesstimate that both the Bureau of Budget and OFB came up with.
All right, thank you for that. So the other thing I was looking at is the corporate taxes, just the averages for a couple months into the pandemic. And so it looks like the quarterly averages are running about 5 million for the first, and then a 3.2 million for the next quarter. But BPT seems to be holding pretty steady. Has there been any analysis as to see what businesses are surviving and resilient during these current circumstances, and whether this can carry us through, or at least an indicator for potential revenues? And that's why I asked if the economist Gary Hiles can be here, but this question can go to, I guess, Steve at OFB.
Well, I can definitely try. In my communication with Gary Hiles out of the Department of Labor, he indicated that I believe out of the 3,000 some businesses here on Guam, half of them are currently being affected by this coronavirus. And he's just saying that if the unemployment will continue at the rate it's going, it's kind of difficult to figure out how much, if anything, corporate taxes will be affected next year. Remember, corporate taxes being collected this year is as a result of events that happened in 2019. What will happen in 2020 by the end of the fiscal year? At the rate we're going, we all know there's going to be reduction. But what the impact of that is again, anybody's guess.
Thank you. This question is for Edward Byrne regarding debt service. So what is the formula to set aside funds to pay off the debt?
It depends on the covenant for each bond that's issued, Senator.
Okay, so
But generally, it's like 6 months' worth of payments have to be escrowed. But that's a generalization, and some of them are different.
so in the conversation I had with you yesterday, you had mentioned that there are times where money is returned to the government once the payment is made. Can you kind of explain how the process of that, is it at 6 months end? Is it at the year's end? And then what happens to the money that gets returned?
No, the money that is required by the bond covenant goes straight to the trustee. So, and they keep the reserves that you just asked about in a separate restricted bank account. During the course of each month, we, for instance, for the BPT funded bonds, we receive BPT. We are required to pay to the trustee all the BPT, but once the debt service is satisfied for the month, whatever that amount happens to be, then the trustee returns the excess receipts back to DOA.
Is there a report on that so we can take a look and see what was returned to DOA through the debt service?
No, not really, Senator. It's simply the excess of receipts over the debt service. So that happens every day. I mean, if we get a BPT receipt today that is not needed to pay debt service, it gets paid to the trustee and returned usually the same day.
Okay. So it stays within the trust account. It's not used for our purposes or anything.
No, once the trust account keeps whatever the debt service is required. Once that reaches the level that's required by the bond covenant, then the excess funds are returned back into the general fund.
Could we get a report on that?
No, as I say, it could happen. Today we might get BPT receipts of 4 million. If we've already satisfied the debt service, we pay it over, and later in the day, the bank returns the 4 million to us. So it's just an intraday issue. There's no need to make any special accounting for it.
All right. This question's for Daphne. So in regards to, are you seeing any trends in regards to business licenses? I think maybe this question was asked already, but is there do you see an effect?
Thank you, Senator Perez. And, one thing that we've begun to do at the Department of Revenue and Taxation, is really begin to look at our business license data. I don't know that that's something that we've really kind of looked into, I guess, in comparison like year over year. As we've, and I know, of course, we are still kind of in the midst of this public health emergency. I think that, we've already started discussions at our agency about business licenses, what it's looking like, and how maybe perhaps this public health emergency might be impacting. I think that, in discussions with our team and also with Gita, we discussed that perhaps we're still a little bit early to tell the full impact of of this pandemic on our businesses and on business licenses. How it works, of course, is business licenses can be renewed throughout the year. There was a period of time, I'm not sure if it was 2015 or prior, where business licenses were all renewed in June. That changed. And when it changed, I believe around 2016, then of course, what happened is then business licenses are now renewed based on the time that a business actually, I guess, begins or gets had got their license when they started operating, right? When they had an active business license. And so we do see business licenses, of course, that are canceled. We also see new business licenses as well. And again, we've started to look at the numbers. Perhaps, and again, we're still very kind of in the midst of it. It's difficult to see any type of trend or anything like that, I think, at this time. But our team is really looking at the count on business licenses. Also, we've begun to, survey or to put into place a process where we survey our businesses if they're canceling a business license. But it is so that way we know the reason. But it is actually possible for a business to continue to have a business license and then to not operate. They may not cancel, or their cancellation may happen, in next January or next July, even though they've already renewed. But yes, we've begun to look at that information, ma'am. And again, I don't think it's it's something that, I think that the data, as we go along, will be good to look at, but I think that at this point, the data is probably not conclusive.
Just another question, what is the processing time for BPT?
3.
Oh, sorry.
Okay,
That was it?
we'll let that one go ahead and ask that part, and then we'll end it there, okay, Senator Sabina?
All right, thank you.
It's all related, but we try to make it 3 questions. Ms. Daphne, you can answer that question.
I'm sorry, would you clarify what you mean?
Is there a backlog as far as processing of BPT?
Yes, and so in fact, we actually just began to do overtime work in the area of BPT. In this last year, and BPT itself, our BPT group, historically has not had an actual permanent supervisor. We've actually had a supervisor that was, detailed there. We had somebody in place for, I believe, a little bit over a year, and then that person left last October. We were able to fortunately get somebody to take over that group in this year. She came in, I believe, in January. And then, of course, we were working to try to get overtime approved so that we can work to try to get the backlog caught up on that backlog. And then, of course, we hit this public health emergency. Making sure that all of our filings are processed timely is very important to us. And it's something that we've again been discussing, and it just so happened that we just have begun to start to do overtime in this yesterday, so that we can begin to get caught up on that, ma'am. And that is why we've been trying to continue to encourage people to file online. I even absent any type of, law, but we've been trying to encourage people to file online, because when you file online, you have your BPTs there readily available. You can always get a PDF copy of it. You don't have to come to our office to get a copy. And not only that, but you can file and you can pay online, and you can do it from the safety of your own home. So those are the things that we've been trying to encourage people to do, and to definitely make sure that people are educated on how to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Barros. My colleagues, because we have Ms. Mendiola on the line, is Ms. Mendiola are you still there on the line?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
All right, we're going to have the Sergeant Arms swear you in first, so just in case the remaining of my colleagues asking questions will want to pose a question to you, want to make sure we cover those bases. Sergeant Arms, please.
Mrs. Mendiola, can I have you raise your right hand and indicate by saying you did? Oh, okay, there you go. Under penalties of perjury, you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, she's sworn in.
Thank you, Sergeant Arms. Thank you, Ms. Mendiola. Senator Moylan, do you have any question on, we have Mr. Carlson, Ms. Mendiola, the panel on both sides. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question per each, the panel. Appreciate it. Director Byrne, we were talking about paying off the deficit, and our previous meetings with you and different sessions that you came in, I think this body, we were also discussing about the surplus in revenue, and we were trying to determine who has the authority to access this surplus in revenue. Adelup's basically was giving us the opinion that Adelup does, the governor does. And from our side, we feel we have the authority to do so. But we were also told to await for the OPA report because it was difficult to determine if there is actually a surplus revenue because things change so much. So from your presentation, Director Byrne, if I understand correctly, we have been able to pay off the government debt. And if the money that were used to pay off some of this debt, which we'll get a report later explaining which debt was paid, is it from the surplus money? Forgive me if you already explained this, but I'm still trying to gather that information. Please, Mr. Byrne.
First of all, Senator, if I may correct you, there's no debt in these numbers. The governmental funds are short-term cash flows only. You will see the debt in the government-wide statements, but those are the ones which I mentioned are currently being finalized. These numbers are all short-term cash flows, so there's no actual debt. The debt service is in here, but not the debt. So really, to try and interpret your question a little bit is that, the budgets that you're considering is a revenue neutral budget. You're looking at appropriating all the revenues. So if there were no changes and everything came in exactly on budget, the accumulated deficit wouldn't change because your revenues and expenditures would be the same, and there would be no change to the deficit, or indeed, I'm sure we're looking forward to the future when there's a surplus. There would be no increase or decrease in the surplus. What can affect the numbers is a difference between the revenues budgeted and the revenues realized. And I think that's one of the things you were referring to, the 29 million or whatever, it's roughly 29 million, and the expenditures budgeted and the expenditures incurred. So the net number, which is why we go through this process of drawing up financial statements, the net number is the change to the fund, and the change of the fund. In this particular case, the fund is in deficit. In most cases, the fund would be a fund and would increase or decrease according to those differences as recorded in the books of account.
Thank you, Director Byrne. So there is a possibility based on this OPA report that would show us a surplus and what is what we're waiting for.
These numbers will be incorporated into the audited financial statements. There's no need to change these numbers because of the delays being caused by another entity.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Director Byrne. Thank you very much. Next question is for Director Shimizu. In our budget, we have identified the provision for tax refund payments of $125 million, and this number has been consistent for several years. I'm wondering, with your past years, or with your experience there, would this money be sufficient, or is an adjustment needed? And if it's not sufficient, where would the funds come from?
Thank you, Senator. Regarding the refunds, I'm looking at our reports, and of course, from year to year, the amounts that get paid out may vary. It could vary from, and if I look at net of offsets, it can vary from 120 million, I think, in 2018. It was a little bit over 133 million in 2019 fiscal years in terms of how much we've paid out, and that's net checks. So, I know that the 125 million is an estimate. It's a number that's been utilized in our budgets. It's close to what we're seeing in terms of net check, the net check paid, and again, that's net of any offsets that are paid out. The question is to sufficiency. I think that it's close to the amounts that we see that's being paid out. It's difficult to tell how much in refunds will pay out in this coming fiscal year. For fiscal year 2019, in terms of a net, how much we paid out, and again, this is net of any offsets, it was a little bit over 133 million. So, the number's pretty close to what we're seeing, I think, in terms of how much we paid out net. And again, but it's difficult to say how much we'll see in terms of refunds
in this next fiscal year.
Thank you, Director. And final question for Director Carlson. If you can give us the numbers again for the past couple of months on a CR/ER report, and also the favorable or unfavorable percentage up to the most recent one that you provided with the 75 million, and it shows a 43.7% favorable between our adopted revenues and what we were tracking. My concern is that in the previous months, when you give us those numbers, I believe those previous months were way below what we were tracking. And what would your estimate be for, I'm assuming would be a favorable point of view from your side, but we also have a threshold of 3%. And I'd like to know your opinion on that 3% before we look at reorganization. If it becomes to that point, is with our current situation and looking on how our revenues will be affected here shortly with the COVID, what do you think about that? So going back the past few months there, where we were short, and then we had this boost in the recent report you provided, and then give us your opinion of the favorable versus unfavorable position at the 3%. Thank you.
All right. And if I may, Senator Moylan, on page
Mr. Carlson,
7
are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. If you're able, were you able
Okay.
to understand the question, please?
Yeah, I think I got some feedback, though. Okay, no, the feedback's gone. Yeah, but before I do, I draw your attention to page 7 of Substitute Bill 282, where it authorizes the additional child tax credit requirements to also be utilized for and deposited into the Tax Refund Efficiency Payment Trust Fund, which is where the tax payments come. So if we get, for example, $10 million in ACTC reimbursements, $9 million of that goes to pay additional income tax refunds, and $1 million can be used for the operations of the Department of Revenue and Taxation. So that's an off-the-books thing that we don't budget for, but the legislature has consistently provided this provision, and that is on top of the $125 million. Now, going back to your question about the material that I sent yesterday, yes, well, at the request of several senators, Senator Teresa Lahi in specifically, there was a request to give us a preview, and so we provided you a draft, subject to change, preview of monies in the general fund collected for the month of July. That's on page 1 of the attachment called Consolidated Revenue and Expenditure Report. And yes, Senator, the columns that says fiscal year 2020 actual collections for the month of July resulted in total tax collections of $126,268,026. So when you overlay what it was that we adopted, and I also sent the by month allocation of all the general fund revenue categories. So for the month of July, because we didn't move the filing date, we didn't adjust anything that was provided to the legislature on October 8th of last year. You go to the next page, and the June CRER showed that we are tracking overall $45 million below revenue estimates, and we always were optimistic that July would make a big dent in that actual revenue collection versus the apportionment by month of the general fund revenues. And we were, our optimism was, it came to fruition. And so on the second page, we show you accumulated revenues for the cumulative period and adopted revenue. So again, you take that same sheet that we gave you that shows how we apportion over the 12-month period by month each tax category, and we juxtapose it on the second page for the first 10 months of the fiscal year, and taking into account that we had a $45 million shortfall in actual collections as opposed to our forecasted budget allotment. Therein lies where you actually arrive at $29 million above the adopted level to date, based on the application of all 10 months worth of collections.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. I'm just going to keep my questions to the limited of 3. I'll discuss further with you offline. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moore. Senator Will, do you have any questions to the panel? The panelists.
I do, Mr. Chairman. Before I direct my questions to the panel, perhaps as the oversight chair, as I put them out there, you can direct it to the appropriate person. I was able to listen in and establish that BBMR is the body that allows control to funds. And then I also heard that DOA is the entity that spends that money and cuts the purchase order. But my question, Mr. Chairman, which I think is fundamental to this whole process, is more along the lines of economic outlook. I'm still trying to reconcile. I heard this about what we know and what we don't know. I also heard that we use past projections. But what I also heard was consternation by members of this body that given the economic realities of the CRER from March to current, that this is not the same thing we're dealing with. And I'm not an economist, I'm certainly not a banker or a business analyst, but I'm a realist. And what I brought today, which I brought yesterday, were the experiences of the past of the Tax Cuts Jobs Act to the tune of $68 million, which at the time we knew the fiscal team was able to project at the time a potential loss of anywhere from $60 to $80 million. And then we put our heads together with the administration and this body, your predecessor's team, and they were able to get pretty close. And so what they came out with, Mr. Chairman, is a bunch of revenue enhancement strategies. There was also an austerity plan. And so I'm going to put 3 questions on the table, and then I'm going to make several statements, and I hope that maybe you can guide me. Whoever the most appropriate person would be from the governor's fiscal team, do you stand by these projections, given the realities of a worldwide pandemic? And please don't answer that yet. Just start to think about that. And the reason why I asked, Mr. Chairman, is because I want to read into the public record. See, I want to make sure that we're accurate, that the public is following this discussion. Yes, this FY21 request came in pre-COVID, and I get it. But it's also important to issue a correctional statement, a statement that characterizes the future. This is not about what happened in the past. This is about where we think we're going to be as world economies are collapsing. So let me read the first sentence, and then my question again is, where do you stand? And could you, in a nutshell, for the general public and for me, my simple mind, help me understand this current economic climate? And I quote, this is from the governor's summary, Economic Outlook, page 13, and I read, quote, Guam's economy is progressing toward an increasingly expansionary trajectory, continuing in its modest growth in FY21, and I'll continue forward, pivoted primarily, and these words are in this executive summary, tourism, federal expenditures, and construction capital investments. And Mr. Chairman, if that is in fact the case, and if in fact everything that we've been told is true with respect to with respect to tourism as one indicator, and forgive me, forgive this novice understanding of the budget, but I want to use two indicators by which I'm going to base my judgment on this budget. Okay, it's going to be on individual taxes and withholding taxes, okay? Because I'll be able to restate that into the record. That was my first question. Mr. Chairman, also, as a matter of public record, this is not my question. I just want to make sure that it doesn't go by the wayside. It's an important question. It's a follow-up that doesn't belong to me, so please just note it for the record. The question was asked, are COVID monies, relief monies, being used to subsidize government operations? And if so, to the tune of what amount and where? I think the request was made yesterday and the assurance was given on record that we would have it by the end of the business day yesterday. Forgive me, I didn't check my email this morning, but I checked yesterday evening and it was not there. But Mr. Chairman, it's important because the 824 compared to the 775 or the $49 million reduction you're proposing, I can appreciate that. But that's 5% of the original submission. That's not even 10% at the TCJA in 2018 when we were discussing this. You're telling me what I read from that, and my very simple understanding is that this global phenomena that's affecting us, particularly Asian markets, we're not guessing. That's not an unknown. That is a fact, okay? It's been submitted by GVB that the inbound tourism is cut by, on average, 90%. Okay, let's be positive. Maybe 80%. There was a 78 in March, and it went 90 and 90 and 90. And so my point would be, if you're cutting that third leg of this economy, and all around you, restaurants are closing, and 32,748 people are unemployed, and your CRER is reflecting that we're not collecting. Oh, there are a couple of anomalies, and I think that's what, I can appreciate Mr. Carlson, because at least he'll give me the facts, but he's not an economist, right? He spoke to the anomalies in June of a plus 25 million. That's a wash from April because the normal date is in April, right? I get it. And then thank you also to you, Mr. Byrne, for helping me understand how there was a spike in individual income taxes. I don't have a sophisticated understanding of the budget, so maybe anybody here can help me. But aside from individual taxes for the month of June, we were trending at minus dollars. It's important to note, and March, April, May, June, July, with no end in sight to 2023, at least for GVB, right? That you're telling me that we're going to be at par, if not better, given all the financial indicators. I don't even understand that. TCJA was 10%. We cut that. Governor Calvo came forward, and it was a vicious battle. It was painstaking. Yet to date, with the collapse of world economies and Asian inbound tourism to this island that we depend on, you're not cutting this budget by even that much? Let me proceed. So again, for the record, I would really like to see the bifurcation or the non-commingling of COVID monies with operations. I get it, we need to. My heart is with customs and quarantine. My father retired from there. But let's be real. No custom user fees, no money for paychecks. So the question becomes, how are we doing that? And again, Mr. Chairman, let me be the first to self-deprecate, to say how I fall short of meeting the standard of doing my due diligence. I did not see the transfer in report as to how we're subsidizing that operation. But let me go on, because that's not my question. I'm putting it on the table for the listening audience so we can formulate our thought process and where we stand. Because if you ask me to vote today, even on your 775, it's no. And on 824, it's an absolute no. I'm sure we can characterize it in other terms. My second question, Mr. Chairman, this is the one I'd like to ask. It's a two-part question, right? Because it's along the line of fiscal responsibility. Please don't answer this yet. I'll come back to it, so I want to be able to put this on the table for you to digest. Back then, we had a fiscal realignment plan that included multiple revenue-generating options. Now, I think we're revenue-generated out. I mean, there's no way to squeeze water from a rock. But the point is, we were looking at ways to stimulate the economy. So as part of a financial plan perspective, do we have, as part of this financial planning purview of the executive branch, or perhaps even our colleagues here, a austerity plan and or a economic revenue generation plan? I'm not talking about taxes. I'm talking about, are we going to go to the federal government? What are we going to do to put us back on our feet? right? At least there's a plan. That would be my second question. My third and final question, again, it's along the current fiscal state of the territory. Mr. Chairman, my uninformed perspective is that we are in a very dire state of fiscal fragility. We are on thin ice, maybe not today, because you got the stimulus, and maybe there's a stimulus in sight. I'm talking about the mid to long-term recovery of the territory. And so my question along that line is to anybody on the panel, and this is my third, it's a two-part question. Are we in a fiscal crisis? Are we in a cash crisis? Mr. Chairman, I just want to read some facts into the record, and then I'll relinquish the balance of my time to my colleagues. Correct me if I'm wrong, after I'm done being totally wrong, assuming I'm wrong. I'm looking at the CRERs for March, April, May, and June. And I was able to pull down, for the public record, the individual taxes as I reported. Let me just start with withholding taxes. For March of FY19, it says we generated 22.5 million. FY20, 17.5. That's a -5. I don't know, 22.4 million for April, and then FY20, 18.8 million. May, 20.2 million for FY19. May, FY20, 15.9. So it's -5, -3.7, -4.3, with the exception of June, which was a positive of 8.7. And I guess Mr. Burns' reasoning makes perfect sense to me, because that stimulus infusion of money into the economy was compounded over, I guess, the affected period of time. That makes sense to me. But I want to qualify that. I want to put an asterisk by that, because stimulus monies, Mr. Chairman, do not completely subsidize the lost income of that individual. As a matter of fact, if my math is correct, and almost always my math is wrong, if you took the $180 million and divided that by 32,723, I mean, just across the board math, you're at a fraction of what they made. So logic would dictate that if you paid me even 50% of my total pay, assuming that to be true, that you should expect 50% less of income and or withholding taxes. Now, maybe again, I don't understand that. But what I want to get on the record is the summative statement from anybody in the administration about the current state of the economy for FY21. I'm sure, by the way, forgive me, I mispronounce these. These are nice words. Are we still progressing toward an increasingly expansionary trajectory, modest growth? So somebody please restate that if in fact the situation has changed, and one only need to look outside and realize that it's never going to be the same, and it's going to be a while before it gets back to a sense of normalcy. That's my first question. My second question and my third question were stated for the public record, Mr. Chairman. If you have any follow-up questions or clarifications, I'm here. And I'll wait for the second round to finish off my smaller questions. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Castro, your first question was to restate what we're not entertaining?
I'm sorry, are we on the FY21 budget?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm in the right room, Mr. Chairman. we're entertaining the budget. I want a macro perspective on the state of economy that is accompanying this adjusted budget submission. Please, help me frame it. And by the way, yes, it's one round, Mr. Chairman, but this is the most important discussion about the budget, because it's upon these suppositions that we traject forward, given the realities of what's happening. I'm not talking about the last 2 years, I'm talking about March to now. So to me, para Guajo, este no mas preciso na tempo pago na para discutir hafa pun mamela por este na budget.
Okay.
And I didn't mean that at you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just putting that on the record, because you've known me over the years. Unless there's a stake to be planted for a point to be made, I usually just fall in line and listen, because it makes sense. But right now, it's not making any sense. Help me understand this.
Pues, Pinotsomodo, bueno. Thank you, Senator Castro. You know, my colleagues, good statement, Senator Castro. I would ask now Mr. Carlson or Steve, before I ask the other panel members. The first question you asked was something that was submitted to this body from the governor's office. That was the statement that you read, Senator Castro. Second one is that you wanted is there an austerity plan? That one, maybe we can ask the panel from the governor's office to respond. That would be Mr. Lester, if he has a response, or if there is a response from that. And then the next one was, I don't know, maybe Mr. Byrne can answer that one. The third question was the physical crisis or a cash crisis. That you can answer after, if Lester would like to answer the first two questions, if possible. Lester, would you like to chime in on that one, sir?
Yes, I would, Senator. And thank you, Senator Castro. Your passion always comes out. As you said, you are normally a very observant and absorbent person. Takes a lot to get you riled up. It's a good thing. May I ask, sir, what quote were you using when you were holding up that piece of paper?
Senor Carlson, pagina 13. Page 13 of the governor's submitted FY20 executive budget. I can make this available for anybody who would like to see it. Well,
Oh, you mean the statement attributed to Gary Hiles?
the statement attributed to
Gary?
the governor's team, whoever wrote it on behalf of the people of Guam for the administration, that statement.
Right, and so just for the record, since you want this to be for the record, Senator Will Castro was making reference to the economic outlook portion of the governor's budget, authored by Mr. Gary Hiles, the chief economist of the Department of Labor. This document was provided to the legislature one day in advance of its mandated submission. It was submitted January 30th of 2020. And that is Mr. Hiles and the collective group's outlook at the time that this was transmitted. Look at the time frame. COVID was something that was happening in Italy. It wasn't in the United States at that time. Look at where we were with all of our CRERs, and everybody will tell you how great a first quarter we had overall. So those statements were carried forward with the upward trajectory in line with the fact that we were collecting funds well over what our monthly allocation for the budgeted amounts were, and there was indeed reason to be very comfortable and have a positive outlook. You also made a reference, Senator Castro, about voting today on 824. Well, sir, I think you meant that general fund 824 million. That's been off the table for months now. There's been a very strong and thoroughly agreed upon realization that what was sent in on January 30th is no longer in play. And that's how come you see that spreadsheet with so many iterations of the OFB and BBMR's discussions. And it starts out with the governor's 824 million. But as Mr. Guerrero pointed out, the current year budget is 803 million. And right after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which thank you again for recalling what transpired in that, the total general fund revenues coming out of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was 775 million. So we have collectively agreed to reduce total general fund revenues. Our number is 781,697,305. OFB's number is 774,697,305, or a difference in general fund of $7 million, which I think I spoke 4 times on where we thought that would be. And you're asking me, do you stand by the fiscal 21 revenues as presented? I stand by firmly, Senator DeCastro, on BBMR's total general fund recommended levels of $781,697,305. I affirm, sir. And the email that you referenced about the federal stimulus, that was sent at 4:04 yesterday to a few senators with the request to disseminate to all senators. I apologize if you didn't get it. I sent it to you while you were speaking and making reference to it at your private email, your Gmail account, sir. So if you didn't get it yesterday, I'm pretty sure you got it right now. Thank you for your passion, sir. And we're not in a crisis. That's why we're sitting here and having a very good back and forth dialogue about what it is that's appropriate to ensure that all primary functions of the government of Guam, particularly public safety, more specifically customs and quarantine, that we have laid out before you with just a very few differences from OFB and BBMR and the governor's fiscal team, a budget for FY21, and we'll get in later to what Senator Shelton was talking about as far as allocation, because the allocation, I believe once we adopt the revenue levels, there needs to just be some sound, very practical application of just how to address, in particular, customs, so that we can ensure those services, the interdiction, the drug detection, all of the things that they do. I even saw a video where they're getting dogs trained to sniff out COVID people. So if we can get a couple of those dogs, that might also promote us in as a more safe haven as tourism starts to rebound. But Senator Castro, I don't believe we're in a crisis. We have a problem that we have to solve. And the problem is with a decline in tourism, yet a very sound economy. You were reading off numbers, and I thank you so much, because you were reading off withholding tax numbers. And those numbers that you mentioned March at $20 million. Well, sir, you take 20 million and you multiply that, because that's what we feel our base is. We feel our base withholding tax numbers are $20 million a month, with or without COVID. And I mentioned yesterday how we anticipate withholding taxes to be well in excess of the adopted 2020 level at 246 million, and we're asking for 235. We're lowballing that number, and OFB and BBMR agree on the individual tax numbers at 71 million. So we have more. We're in more agreement than we are disagreement. I think the real work is going to be after the body decides on a revenue amount, how to allocate that revenue and ensure that there's general fund money that goes over to assist customs, because without it, there won't be any customs. I hope that answers your questions, my friend.
Thank you, Lester. As usual, I appreciate your responses. Yes, I think you're correct on that point. We are in agreement that if you're going to use the International Monetary Fund as a reference, please allow me to restate for the record, and this time a June statement by the same source, that they were projecting in January of 2020 a 3% growth. World GDP, I would presume that's what that is. Mr. Burns, I don't know. And then they came back and reissued a statement, I think in March, that it was contracting, that they anticipate the rest of 2020 to contract at 3%. And in their words and not mine, that would equate to the IMF saying it is, quote, the worst recession since the 1930s. I don't necessarily agree that we're not in a crisis. I'm sure that 33,000 unemployed people out there have a difference of opinion. We're talking about the government. maybe, perhaps, the government's able to stabilize. I'm talking about the effect upon the community outside of the government. I'm not trying to contradict or debate you, Mr. Carlson. I'm just looking at my good chairman here to make a point for the record. And I was asking for a restatement, but I'll go ahead and accept that there isn't a revised statement to this increasingly expansionary trajectory based on revised amounts. And no, I'm still a firm no, even at the adjusted amount, given the current financial indicators that I'm looking at. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure I could be convinced otherwise in the days ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Speaker Munya, do you have any questions, ma'am? Thank you.
Thank you, Manana Sizuis, Mr. Chair. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. As I was listening to the questions that were being asked earlier by my colleagues, maybe I just want to see if I can get a recap. And just to make sure, I mean, I know that based on the projections of 2020 and going into 2021, that for the first quarter, you know, our projections versus our actuals were great. Second quarter, January to March, we're still doing great. We're looking at positivity, and then we had this invisible war come upon us. And you know, this pandemic, which is not just happening here, but it's happening worldwide. And it's how do we vision the projections and the actuals when we know that this war is not over? I don't think it's over. I don't think it's going to be over soon. We thought that based on all the precautions and the restrictions that were being imposed, that it would, you know, that we would see our numbers flattening. But all of you guys know, and at least for me personally, that doesn't seem to be the case. And as I see that real realization, I just want to regroup, because when we make these decisions and we're looking at the numbers between what the administration is offering and what the Office of Finance, based on the information presented, that we are at a $6 million difference. Am I quoting that correct? Can I just get a justification there from Mr. Steve? We're looking at 6 million, right? Difference in the budget. 775, and they're asking for
81.
81, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to make sure that even as we look at the actual monies today, I want to ask, maybe my first question was, monthly adopted revenues versus actual, and I got the sheet in front of me. It's looking at 75,228,458, right? Which is about 75.2.
That's correct.
Okay. Does this balance, or the overage, which I think is a good thing, does that take into account the 62 million shortfall for at least the previous couple of months, April and May?
Senator, it depends how you read the report.
Does this balance take into account the $62 million shortfall in April and the 13 million shortfall in May? Does this take into account?
If you're talking about to the year end, it should.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. But if you look at the report, there's certain sections. There's a section there that it's the monthly collection, what they collected for the month, what they collected for the period. It could be 1, 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, or there's a section there that also says to year end. So the year end basically will tell you, based on tracking, what the final number would be at the end of the fiscal year. So in the last report that they gave us, I believe yesterday, it wasn't a report, it was just information they gave us, which the format is similar to the CRE report.
Right.
They gave us a monthly total, they gave us a year-to-date total, but I didn't see a year-end total. So if you look at the year-end total, it should have encompasses all the negatives and positives collection throughout the year.
So if we were to take that all the way through, I'm like my good colleague said from, where are you from? Aragata? What, are we looking at a positive or a negative if we were to work the worksheet through for the whole?
Senator, what we can do is we can look at the amounts that are being projected to be collected
Yeah.
for both August and September. If we reach those thresholds and taking the current balance, if we generate enough to cover the negative balance as of today for the last 10 months, plus the added numbers for August and September, if we hit the threshold, then we can actually end the fiscal year at the level of the appropriation that's the level of the revenues we're generating, we expect to generate. If not, then of course you're going to have a negative balance. How much of the negative balance really determines on the collection for the remaining 2 months.
But, so maybe my question too is that the corporate taxes collected in July, right? Was over and above, because I know that taxes that were due in April were deferred to July. That's correct, right?
That's correct, yes.
So maybe the explanation of why, maybe you can explain to me in detail why we can attribute that? Because I would say that it was just, instead of seeing the numbers in April like we've done in the previous years, we saw it in July because it was deferred to, the tax payments were deferred to July. Am I saying that right?
Just remember, Senator, the collection for corporate taxes is actually for fiscal year 2019 that we're collecting this year. So whatever that, and remember, 2019 was a robust year. The economy was good, so whatever monies we're getting is going to be reflected in this year's collection. But that doesn't necessarily hold true for next year, because what we're experiencing now is what's going to be reported out in 2021. And this is where I was saying earlier in our projections, we can take the trend. And if the trend shows that we're staying afloat and we're meeting those projections, that's fine. But you also got to consider the effects of what's not going to be around next year. And when you factor that all in, that's where you can determine whether or not current levels should go up, go down, or just maintain where they are.
Okay, so.
The other thing too, Senator, is in most categories, we have what we call anomalies. And some of the anomalies, when it comes to anomalies,
Like,
some of these anomalies would actually spike the collection for various reasons. Some vendors will come in and make huge payments, sometimes in the millions, which will, you don't normally put in the trend, but it is collection and you do record it. But for future reference, we normally take those anomalies out because we don't expect it to happen again.
right. Okay, understood. Then maybe I want to also ask that based on the stimulus that we received from the CARES package and working on what PUA has provided to those who have filed for unemployment or those who were furloughed, how much of the withholding is from the pool of payments? Do you have a tracking on that, or do you have an actual breakdown?
I'm sure it's available, and they do record it in the system, but that information is not available to us at this point. But I know it's there because I know when they post it, they post charges that are charged to local accounts and then charges that are funded out of the federal CARES money. So I know they separate it, but I'm not privy to that information right now, Senator.
The reason why I'm asking is because we know that businesses have had to put employees on whether reduced time, furlough, or let go. And we know that the stimulus package, the poor unemployment, has been paying. And I just wanted to make sure if those numbers are going to be afforded accordingly. Because if they're not getting it all, right? If you're getting the 345 plus the 6, that's going to be, they're going to be deducting the taxes, am I right? So that's why I thought those numbers would be there, and maybe also add that would you say that the PPP requirements to maintain employees is also contributing to the baseline of the withholding of about 20, I don't know, 20 million per month? I'm just trying to get a feel.
You're correct, Senator, and I will also add that the Bureau budget did provide a number somewhere around the vicinity of about 18, 19 million for PUA. So when we looked at the total revenues collected for June and July, we actually extracted about 18 million out of that, which we feel is not part of shouldn't be part of the trend going forward when you calculate for 2021, because it's not that we don't anticipate, but for me personally, it may not be around next year, so I cannot put that as part of the base going forward.
So that's why maybe I can make, clearer is how will the baseline be affected once the requirement to maintain employees levels for a certain period of time expires? And in other words, as long as the PPP is in effect, employers maintain employees under payroll, but once it expires, it's going to let them go. And that's something that in my mind, even based on what is coming down from the latest support package from the federal government, is how is that going to affect, and also knowing what might be provided today, because I know that even with the recent executive orders from the president, that whether the effect is going to hit us or not, we're hoping it's not, but where do we go from here? And again, this invisible war has literally taken a big effect on everybody around the world, but here for us, here in our small communities, how do we relate, and how do we be fair, and how do we continue to maintain the livelihood or the sustainability of us moving forward to be fair and not just take away? Because if we take away, we're going to see our community hurt even more. So maybe you can help me there. Just try and...
The PPP is one of the major concerns we had in regards to estimating withholding. Currently, the law says that as long as companies and employers are being funded out of the PPP, they are required to maintain their current level of employees. But once they are not recipients of PPP monies, there is nothing that requires them to keep these employees on the payroll. And if the economy doesn't change and they don't generate sufficient funds to independently continue their business without the assistance, there's a good chance they will start releasing these workers who would then become unemployed, thereby resulting in less revenues coming back into the government in terms of withholding, because they will not be employed at that point. So, for now, everything's all right because they're employed, they're receiving federal funds. Federal funds is helping the bottom line as far as revenues are concerned. But once this whole thing comes to an end, there's no guarantee that, we will continue to receive, at least generate the levels of revenues we're experiencing now.
Maybe I can ask one more question real fast as it relates to the PUA. I know that when the executive order came down, we called the White House asking, sent a message back that they're still working on it and they're going to let us know. So I guess based on what those that have filed the PUA claim have been getting that certain amount, the 345 plus the 600, and then the changes, and then what the government would have to pay if this were to go through and we were to accept it, the 25% into, how will that affect us as a community paying forward, moving forward?
Well, for purposes of our determining the revenues, what was really concerning to me is that, and of course, remember this executive order was just issued yesterday, or actually 2 days ago, which really wasn't part of our mix when we were estimating the revenues. A couple of things that are concerns is, yes, they did extend the unemployment all the way to December at a lower rate, of course. The requirement now is 75 federal, 25 local, with the caveat that the local fund, the 25% be funded out of either funded by the states and or territories. If I'm not mistaken, it is also my understanding that the 25% can be funded with federal assistance monies. So the bottom line is it's kind of like a 100% federally funded program, just at a lower rate. The other thing too is on the deferment, the holiday pay deferment, all the way to December. What we expected to collect in September, October, will now have to be delayed until December. But it's also my understanding there is a provision within the same executive order that allows the treasurer to look into the possibility of forgiving those deferments altogether. So what we anticipate to collect later on might not come to fertility come that time, should these measures go into place, go into effect. So there's still, again, a lot of uncertainties. We can calculate based on the number of unemployment going forward with the projected amount they're supposed to receive. But at the same time, if administrative provisions change and change the whole understanding of what the executive order is saying today, it would just change everything else that we're doing right now. And it would be difficult to kind of figure out what to expect in the future. Things are changing almost daily. And it's what we can figure out today and make some sense out of, tomorrow we totally change again. So that's what makes it so difficult to predict just 30 days from now, 1 month, 3 months, let alone 12 months in the future. It's very difficult. I've been reaching out, people giving me a lot of comments, but nobody will give me anything definite. They're all assumptions, they're all predictions, but if we're going to base everything on that, and by the way, that's all we have to go with right now, we just got to make the best of it.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome.
Senator Kelly, do you have any questions?
Siduis Masi, Mr. Chair. And I want to start off by just saying that I really appreciate not only the committee of the whole, but calling in the additional experts and people who have information at their hands. It's been so important these last hours of today and a bit of time yesterday to be able to ask the many questions that have been asked. There are so many unknowns. We're all very wary. We're all very concerned. And so to be able to ask these questions, receive the best of expert understandings has just been so important. And so I've appreciated listening to all the many questions that have preceded me. As I'm one of the last ones to ask questions, most of my main questions were answered, and so I just have a couple of maybe more general questions. So, given that this is all unknown, and we're just kind of making the best estimates that we can, is there any sort of guidelines, guesstimates, estimates as to when we might be looking towards something that's akin to normalcy. I've heard figures like it started off as 18 months and then it has stretched into maybe 4 years. Has anybody heard from their expert fields any current estimates, just to give us that background understanding of what we're looking at, really?
Senator Kelly, I'm going to try to pass that on to Ms. Mendiola from GITA. Maybe she can give us if she's heard anything out in the market out there. Ms. Mendiola, maybe you might be able to answer that question that Senator Kelly posed, is there anything out there in the market that you're aware of that we may hopefully or see a possible reach a point of normalcy or close to it? Have you seen anything in the market, ma'am?
Well, when it comes to economic normalcy, there's really only two ways the market goes. The market goes up and the market goes down. But I did want to spend a little bit of time helping to give you comfort about what we're dealing with and helping you to kind of, hopefully helping you to make decisions as you move forward. So earlier, Senator Castro asked for a macro perspective on things, and that's something that, I used to teach Econ 101 or BA 110 over at the University of Guam. And I would always share with the students, how do you grow an economy? The main ways to grow an economy, or the ways we measure the growth of the economy, as cited by Senator Castro, was the GDP, the gross domestic product. The components of the GDP are as follows: consumption, investment spending, government spending, and net exports. Okay, so when there's financial fragility in an economy because of a pandemic situation, you want to make sure that your GDP is reinforced. The main way to reinforce, one of the main reactionary ways to reinforce it, is through encouraging consumption spending. Consumption spending was what was accomplished through the pandemic unemployment. It was accomplished through the Programan Ajuda ni Tautau, all of those sort of fiscal stimulus, all those stimulus checks that came out. Yes, of course, we see in the environment, there are restaurants closing, but there's also, I heard a rumor that AK ran out of trucks. I see the shelves at Ross, they're empty. Home Depot, the lines are out of control. So there's definitely some spending going on there. And I think that is reflected in the financials in kind of a lagging basis. When there's this discussion about expansionary, when they say our economy we're in an expansionary environment, expansionary doesn't mean we're building things. Expansionary from the economic standpoint means government stimulus is critical, meaning the government has to step in and flow money to the islands or flow money into our economy. The way that the federal government provides fiscal stimulus is by injecting money into the economy. The more money you have in the economy, the more circulating happens, the more multiplying happens, and the more that multiplication contributes to the GRT, the BPT, and all the different tax bases that we have, right? So back to normalcy, when it comes to being back to normal, what I think back to normal is our GDP isn't on this sort of wild up and down kind of pattern. Our GDP stabilizes and then has a steady kind of like a step ladder up, right? So the first things first, as senators, consumption spending, don't stand in the way of consumption spending, right? Let people go out and spend their money as we please. Open the floodgates to federal funding coming through to Guam. Advocate with our with our representative in Washington, D.C. to send more assistance out this way in every form, whether it's housing assistance, food stamp assistance, stimulus payments, et cetera. Make sure that when people get small windfalls, make sure that we're helping people make small windfalls, right? And that they can inject that into the economy. Investment spending. Any of you who have oversight over agencies that somehow have something to do with the process of getting buildings built. This is every agency under the government of Guam, from EPA with their environmentals, CAHA with percentage of the arts, DPW, Parks and Rec, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure that those delays aren't occurring so that investment spending, the floodgates are open so that investment spending occurs, right? Government spending, rather than micromanaging the data, the minutia of, does this agency have 33 people instead of, because last year you had 31 people, why'd you hire these 2 extra people? Did you need these 2 extra people? Rather, it's important to hold accountable to, is this agency taking advantage of federal grants? Remember, again, bringing money into the island, right? Expansionary. How are we participating in the expansionary process? How is the government of Guam participating in putting money out there, right? And then net exports. Our biggest component of net exports is tourism, right? And so how are we participating in the tourism process? How soon can we get back to normal? Usually, I trust the presentations that I get from the Guam Visitors Bureau and all that they're projecting. Their projections, if you look at their information on their website, they're informed by the carriers, what they're saying about coming back to Guam. They're talking about the carriers. They're talking about, let me see, what else are they factoring into their forecasts about what other governments are doing, so the source countries. The other thing I like about the Guam Visitors Bureau projections is that they're only projecting on the basis of visitors from source countries, okay? Our tourism, let me see, our hotel occupancy numbers were like 70% for April, 50% for May, and then 20% for June. All of that was attributed to defense spending. They don't factor that in to the projections that they make when they're projecting out for the future. This is what we've been going through as we've been going through the GWA bond sale. So I think that from the perspective of normalcy, whether or not we ever get back to normalcy is really not as much of an issue as what is the legislature doing to support and promote the growth of our economy through the growth of those components of the gross domestic product. Yeah, that's all I have.
Senator Kelly, do you have another question?
Seduis Masi, I was still typing some of those notes. She provided so much helpful information. The other question, okay, so one of my other concerns is looking at the licensing and permit fees. So for some of my agencies and others that are out there, the executive orders have waived some of these. And so I'm wondering to what degree the waiving of those fees has been calculated in, partly, at least for all of us, but at least for me, those special funds really are a significant portion of my, the agencies that are under my committee's oversight. And so if we're projecting that the museum fund is going to earn $400,000 in the next year, and yet it's closed right now, and they're working towards reopening, or the recreation fund is projected to have $116,000, although to date we've only collected $68,000. Again, I am concerned. So if I could understand if those waivers have been calculated in, and if there are other considerations that we need to look at for those special funds as well.
Thank you. Daphne, do you have a response to that?
I can speak on the things that we've waived at the Department of Revenue and Taxation. We've actually not waived fees, but we have waived we've not waived actual, fees as mandated, but we have waived the regular fees. We've waived late fees and penalties because of, of course, there was issues with people trying to get their business license renewed on time, trying to get their driver's license renewed on time, trying to get their vehicle registrations renewed on time. So the actual fee for the actual service was not waived. The baseline revenues that we're going to get from those items, at least, if we're able to continue to get the same level of business licenses, vehicle registrations, driver's licenses, to get renewed and registered or licensed, then, the baseline, we don't expect a change in that. But, of course, we had to give consideration for the fact that we were closed down, and that also that we have limited capacity due to social distancing. And in fact, because of the surge now, we're just working again to tighten up on our measures to make sure that, we continue to keep our people safe. So there have been no waiving of the base fee. The only thing that we have given consideration of was, of course, any late fees as they relate to, of course, the limitations due to the public health emergency.
Did that answer your question?
Well, it helps me for DRT, but for entities under my oversight, like I said, for the museum, and then there's been the waiver of the burial fee for the Department of Parks and Recreation, and so, you know, that may continue for the next 18 months.
We can ask Mr. Byrne if he can answer that, if there's any, if he's aware of any of the waivers, because my understanding of all the licensings were all just, it was more the penalties and the interest that follows that, late fees. But Mr. Byrne, maybe you can answer that in the burial side and stuff like that, if there were any waivers.
I don't have the details of all the fees, Senator, but as you can see, most of this amount, and I think I'd like Mr. Guerrero to confirm this, most of this amount that you're looking at here are licenses. You know, fees actually can make up a very small amount of the revenues. And I don't know what the plans are with respect to each individual's agency's fees, but I don't think it's, the numbers here you're looking at are going to be that sensitive to any changes.
And I appreciate both of your sets of information because some of my entities' budgets are on the small side. Even $80,000 is, for us, a big impact. So I'm going to continue to look at that carefully. And do you have any insight, Mr. Byrne, as to, let's say, the waiver of the burial fees? For some of these waivers, that's the one I'm most familiar with. Can any of that be covered by COVID assistance, since it is a COVID-related situation?
One of the rules, and the rules keep on changing, but this one seems to be fairly firm, is that we're not allowed to make up lost revenues with CARES Act funding. So the answer is probably no.
Okay, I was trying to weigh that out in my mind, but yeah, my assessment is along those lines as well. Let me see if I had any questions left. So really it was just those concerns at this point. Like I said, most of my other questions were answered. So just my
All right, thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Therese, you're the last but not the least.
Oh, well,
You're
thank
it.
you, Mr.
All
Chair.
right, thank you.
All right. We've got a wealth of information today that we've been asking for quite a while, so I'm very glad. Thank you. And we've got some good news, of course, from the past. That's good to hear. Instead of $22 million excess in 2019, we have $28 million excess in 2019. We were able to pay off $35 million in deficit. And but I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to stick to two goals right now, Mr. Chair. I know you're concerned. I just want to know how we can better this budget to ensure a prompter payment of tax refunds, especially for the what looks like 30,000 taxpayers who are due refunds, totaling $82 million for 2019. Those are 2019 tax refunds. Still due, processed and waiting. And my other goal is, of course, to, like my colleagues, to make sure that we are going to choose the revenue estimate that is reasonable enough to, provide critical services. But, if it's better than what we provide, that's great. I want to come back in and then reprioritize at that time. But I don't want to overproject, and then I think that really creates problems that we don't need to add to our existing problems right now. So if I could ask for the tax refunds, Mr. Byrne, how much of the $35.6 million that you paid for deficit to take care of the 2018 deficit was for tax refunds?
Senator, if you look at the sheet that I prepared,
Yes,
the
says
provisions
provision.
for tax refunds,
$7 million?
well, it actually went up by $7 million, which reflected the additional refunds generally that came out of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But please bear in mind that these numbers are based upon the fiscal year... No, no, these are fiscal 19 numbers, so they're the tax refunds that were paid out in respect of taxes paid in the calendar year 2018.
Okay, so they're paid during fiscal year 2019 for 2018 tax refunds.
Yes.
But what is the amount? Sorry. Did you pay? Did you pay 131 or did you pay 7? I guess I'm...
No, we paid 131.
Okay, all right.
Net, a net of the ACTC that you heard about earlier.
Okay, so what is the report going to show is the balance from 2019, I guess, from...
That's something that Daphne, I think, will be able to tell you?
The end of the year. No, at the end of this. Okay.
Okay, I would, so Senator, I would have to pull up the refund liability report perhaps for September 2019 to show what that would be. If we're talking about fiscal year 19, and excuse me, because I was looking at, I'm sorry, not the refund liability report. So I was looking at the most recent refund liability report, but we can provide you with the September 2019 refund liability report, which will show what we had processed and what we had sitting, I guess, at that time, if that's your question. How much was left over to be paid as of the end of FY19?
Correct.
For this year. I don't have that information right now, but I can tell you, hold on just a second, at least based on the fiscal, this fiscal year, the most recent refund liability report, which you do have, hold on just a second, let me pull it up.
39.
We can see how much was already paid. So as of the month of June, we ran the numbers which you have, ma'am, and then let me just open it quickly.
All except 4 million has been paid for 2018.
Okay, so correct. As of June, and you know, we did begin to pay out the 2019 income tax returns a few months ago, or refunds a few months ago. So yes, we have about 4.71, not including interest, that's left over as of the June 30 report, and we'll have the July 31 report ready within the next couple of days. So that was how much was left over, which is about 4.7 million, but that's only for individual. If you look at the bottom of the page, that same report, there's actually a section that refers to the business returns. You know, there is about, in that section, if you look at row H, 4.62 million. So as of June 30, we had about 4.62 million in corporate income tax refunds that was still awaiting payment. So there's a total of that 4.62 plus the 4.71 that we had left over. Of course, it's broken out by individual and corporate. So the bottom portion of the, excuse me, that's 4.62 is the total. Hold on.
Okay. All right. That's not as bad as 80 million. I'm worried, I guess, about this 80 million in 2019 taxes, tax refunds that we owe right now. And I know that technically you're going by this, you know, we don't have to pay it and, you know, for 6 months, and that you've been consistently paying. But I was hoping that we were going to be able to find a way to pay those off before, you know, we move on to the next fiscal year in a month or 2 months. And but if it's an $80 million liability, even with the corporate, you know, receipts that are showing favorable for July, overall, it really doesn't come anywhere close to that. The estimate for, by the way, so your liability total for 2019 was only 100 million, and we had estimated, I think, about 135, or wait, what did we estimate? 125. Is that an anomaly, or?
Actually, so it's based on how many returns we've already processed and have received. So there are actually people who still haven't filed their
I
tax
see.
returns,
Okay.
who may not have filed until July 15, or some that will file in October.
All right, so we've been approximating average about paying over the last 5 years about 138,000. We've been budgeting in our bills for about 125, million. Just wanted to know for FY21 if you believe 125 million is still reasonable, or should we up that to what the average has been, 138 million?
And thank you for that question. And I know Senator Moylan also asked a similar question. And, Director Carlson also brought up the fact that there is this, the additional child tax credit, the ACTC reimbursement that we do receive. That $125 million that we pay out is actually, or that is showing on the budget, is net of that. And so, in terms of the total amount paid out, I don't have the total amount of ACTC reimbursement that we've received so far, but it's my understanding, and I'm not sure if Director Byrne has the total. I'm sorry, I don't have it readily available.
All right, well, maybe when we get to that part of the pages, you can please provide more exact information.
Sure.
All right, and then, okay, so Mr. Chair, my second goal, of course, is that our revenue. So, we had a good receipts in 2019. That's clear. That's great. In 2020, it looks like our receipts might be, for the general fund, might be a little bit better than, what was originally predicted during the pandemic because of different factors, including federal aid, right? So for 21, you've explained, Mr. Guerrero, that it's a whole new ball game. Not only is it not going to be the excellent revenues as in 2019, it's not going to be the federal revenues as in 2020. And so, you were just trying to base it on other things. So I want to give you credit for bringing this budget down at the general fund portion at least, is by $28.9 million less than the fiscal year 2020 adopted revenues. I think that's a huge feat, and it's going to be a huge feat for all of the government to pull that off. And so I can understand the administration's concern that, they would like to add a little bit more to that. But I guess I've heard your explanation, but if I could just ask you one more time, why are we not using these positive corporate revenues that we have just received in July as indication that we should, or even the positive withholding revenues that we received during July as a basis for boosting our projections for FY21? If you could make that crystal clear, why you did not accept that.
Well, at least for the corporate category, if you look at the trends of what we're trending, although, and based on the recent CRA report that was submitted just yesterday, which again wasn't part of because it's an actual amount. We didn't know what the amount was until yesterday. We need to incorporate that into our projection. But from what we had up to June, we were kind of tracking almost what we were expecting to receive in 2021 with a slight decrease. But you also got to remember, I believe there's also a one-time payment of $9 million that was made under the corporate. So that's not a normal type of entry into the revenue recording. So we kind of you have to think about that. It's not going to happen again next year. So yeah, although you see a spike in the total collections for corporate, you need to go back and analyze what the increase is, what causes the increase, and whether or not, and to determine whether or not you want to use those figures to project forward. So on the corporate, I think we were very much kind of agree upon, even the Bureau of Budget agreed upon the number. I guess just within the last month's collection, because of an increase, they were asking for additional additional authorization in terms of appropriation. I believe about $2 million more since we finalized our revenue numbers in preparation for the budget.
What was that 9 million anomaly that you described?
Yeah, we just noticed it on the system as a payment.
Oh, do you know what that is, Mr. Byrne or Daphne? 9 million that was received during July in corporate taxes?
And I'm sorry, I mean, when we're looking at the reports, I don't have the details of the reports.
All right,
The
we'll
collection reports.
maybe get that answered later. That's good. But, okay, so then, Steve, so I appreciate that you're being conservative and that we're not going to incorporate these anomalies from the good tax year 2019 into even, in 2020. And we're not, and you said you took out, or even the federal PUC unemployment and the federal and PPP, you've kind of factored those in already, or you need to still factor those in? You've already factored those out for 21, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Or up to December?
Yeah, based on our tracking, our actually tracking was about 245 million for the year. But, considering those are factors that we need to factor in the bottom line, we actually reduced it about 15 million. That's how we got down to the 240.
Okay.
I mean, the 230, not 240, 230.
All right.
So there's a difference about 15 million between what we're tracking and what we're estimating for next year.
Okay, if you could just show us maybe later how you got the 15 million?
Yes.
And then, but you said in the beginning of your presentation that you did not incorporate the executive orders by by the president, and that we were not sure about what the impacts of that might be. So I think the impacts might be, I don't know. I heard the governor on the radio this morning say that we are looking at, if I heard her correctly, between $30 to $40 million of liability, not the opposite. Is that correct? Did I hear that right, Mr. Byrne? Do you know? Is there a potential with the executive orders that the president has issued that we, in order to meet those benefits, would have a liability of $30 to $40 million? I guess.
Yeah, that actually sounds about right, based upon the payments we're making out at the moment.
So in order to avail ourselves of any additional federal benefits under those orders, we would have to pay out 30 to 40. She said we did not have that kind of money right now.
That's correct.
All right. Did you factor in, Mr. Guerrero, any other potential federal aid for 21 in your revenue estimates?
The only federal aid that we factored in basically was for the pool that we expect to end in December. But that's only for the first quarter of 2021.
Okay. And just if I could ask Gita, how much is left in the CARES money that was allocated to Gita for small business grants? Is there any money left in that? Hi, Melanie.
Yes. Half a day, Senator. Yes, there is money left in the the small business pandemic grant is still open. And there is still money available for applicants that continue to come in. There is the option at some point in time for the governor to reprogram the money towards other economic development types of uses, such as to stimulate a specific sector of the economy, such as tourism or agriculture. So there is that option available. However, we're currently, if you just give me one moment, I can pull a good number up for you. So we have 8.8 plus. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Senator. I can give you that number in just a few moments. I just need to pull up the information, but you can, if I believe we're right around the 14 million mark, 14 million mark. I don't think we're at 15 million just yet.
14 spent out of the 20 that was allocated?
That's correct.
All right. And was the program, I know we discussed this and I think the answer might be no, but just confirm please if the program was ever expanded to cover small businesses whose income is from rental. In other words, for rent relief for the tenants.
No, Senator, it was not expanded to that point.
All right, okay. Mr. Chair, I know we want to take turns. Are we going to have another round of?
This will end it. This will end it.
Oh.
This is why you had your 3 questions, because remember, we still have to get to the budget. And I know there's going to be many questions that all our colleagues are going to be asking, and when we get into the budget, then we can factor whatever we need to factor in.
Oh, okay,
Because
then
you
could I
brought-
just ask Mr. Byrne, could you please provide us a list of exactly what was paid with the $28.2 million 2019 excess revenues? And when you said $7,451,000 was transferred, what does that mean? Are those transfers that we've seen in documented transfers during FY 2019, or did those transfers take place during FY 20?
Senator, the first part of your question, I tried to explain in my opening remarks that payment is not an appropriate word to use.
Oh.
There was a reduction of liabilities, an increase in assets. That's what the surplus was. This sheet shows you which, in broad terms, which categories increased and which decreased. You cannot list it out. A balance sheet is a summary of a point in time, and the purpose of drawing up a balance sheet is that you establish what your liabilities and assets are at that point in time, and the change in that is the surplus or deficit. The 7 million that is net transfers is the result of GovGuam paying almost all the payments and receipts go through the general fund. So if a special fund has a payment to make, the general fund pays it out first. It advances the money to the special fund, and the special fund reimburses it. So in this case, as you can see from the balance sheet, due from other funds is at the end of 1952.7 million, and due to other funds is 36.1 million. So other funds, including the federal fund, owes money to the general fund, and the net effect of all this movement back and forth is the 7.5 million. I think in the past the Department of Administration was criticized for using special funds to subsidize the general fund. What you see here is in fact the other way around, is the general fund is fronting the money for many special fund payments.
All right, and so you're saying that you cannot provide us a listing of what liability has decreased with excess revenues?
This sheet does do that.
All right, I know, but it's very general.
Yes.
It's very general categories, and I'm asking for the specifics. So what about, was the $10 million put to the hospital fund, capital improvement fund?
No, because we haven't eliminated the deficit yet. We've still got 40 million to go. And no business entertains a deficit year after year. The business will go out of business. And as I pointed out a few minutes ago, the budget that you're looking at is a balanced budget. It doesn't provide for any method of further reducing the deficit, that can only happen through additional collections or reduced expenditures that are not contemplated in the budget. So the concentration, from everyone must be to do whatever we can to further reduce this deficit. And once it's eliminated, then you can talk about how the surplus should be allocated.
Are you, okay.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Byrne, for the statement. Now, Senator, Mr. Guerrero, you have some clarifications you wanted to clear up with your statement earlier with Senator Therese?
Yes, Senator Talai, when you were asking about what type of federal assistance money did we consider, or is it part of the revenue base going forward? I did mention that we did take into account the PUA, but also keep in mind that the CARES money is still available for and still be readily used in going forward. Also, the $42 million that was awarded to DOE, the $12 million that was awarded to the governor. So all those money will still be utilized as we go forward. What the net impact it would have is just, we just can't determine that. But we know that money is still being injected into the economy.
So how did you incorporate it? Did you incorporate it in your projections or not? Because actually these projections are way over the actuals. Even with $28 million cuts from FY20, they still look to be way over actual collections from FY20, right? But so how did you incorporate that type of money into your FY21 projections?
We didn't basically incorporate the dollar amount, but we did incorporate the potential impact it may have. To quantify that, it was almost difficult, just like right now. I mean, we know we have $117 million of CARES money. We all thought that would be injected into the economy, we would get a residual effect. We haven't really seen anything. The only thing we know is we're maintaining, we're not dropping $50, $60 million like everybody thought as a result of the pandemic. We're still keeping afloat. Like Lester mentioned, there's no real way to figure out how much less we're going to receive this year, but we all anticipate it's going to be less. How much, we really don't know.
So what did you do? That's what I'm asking. What did you do to estimate a bump up with the money that's been allocated to DOE, the money that's been allocated to the governor for expansion?
We didn't per se use it to bump it up. We just looked at the trend to see what we were trending now, and hopefully that, and like I said, there's a lot of unknowns in the future. So for us to say that the $42 million is going to inject $10 million into the economy or in revenues, we don't know, but we know that our revenues shouldn't go down any further than what we already anticipate. And it's hard to quantify that, but we know it's there. We know the potential that it could decrease, but we also know the possibility that it could maintain and stay at the same level.
So what does this amount reflect? That we staying at the same level, or did you incorporate those other?
Yeah, the revenue levels, like I said, it's based on trends. Like I mentioned earlier about if you look at corporate, we actually reduced corporate by 15 million because we already know that what happened this year is not going to happen next year simply because of the economy. Withholding's the same thing. BBT is the same thing. So when you take all those things into consideration, I mean, you kind of like estimate that this is exactly what's going to happen. Not exactly, but this is what you anticipate will happen 12 months down the line. It varies, it's fluid, it can change in a matter of a day, it can change maybe overnight. But this is the best assessment we came up with. Mind you, it's the total budget is reduced by $66 million if you include the special funds. So it's a big hit for Governor Guam to reduce its operation by $66 million overnight. So when you start to assess how we did the allocation, I mean that's something that was really difficult to do, but we managed to do it and still keep within that same level.
All right, Mr. Chair, thank you.
All right, thank you. My colleagues, first, I'd like to ask the panel from the administration, Mr. Lester and your folks, Mr. Byrne and Ms. James, Ms. Mendiola, if you could return, please, after we recess for lunch. And I know the OFB will be here, and then we'll ask that you stay with us throughout the budget discussion. That being said, we will recess for lunch until 2 o'clock. And then when we return, we will proceed into Bill 282-35 as substituted by my committee. Thank you.